Welcome to the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. I'm your host, Hope Bohannic, and you can find all our past shows by going to our website, hopefortheanimalspodcast.org, and you can also find us on social media. Come and engage with us on Facebook and Instagram. Today we have a Halloween-themed show, and our guest is Marla Rose of Vegan Street. We will be discussing being vegan around the holidays and other things, and it was a fun interview. We laughed a lot, so I hope you enjoy it. I love Halloween, though sometimes it can get a little too creepy for me. Kojin and I like what we call spooky cute, like Scooby-Doo or, cute ghosts with smiley faces. We're into the spooky cute, but sometimes it gets a little gruesome and gory for us. But there's some interesting stuff to dig into with the connection of horror and horror movies and animal rights. I used to be able to watch horror movies when I was much younger. I loved zombie movies and other things, but I just can't handle it anymore. I am just too wincy and wussy now. But interestingly, I want to talk about this connection of horror movies and animal rights. So I'm going to start us off today with a discussion about cannibalism in the spirit of Halloween. Now, if you find yourself revolted by the thought of cannibalism before you turn off the podcast and skip this episode, I want you to ask yourself why. Why is talking about cannibalism more disturbing than talking about meat eating or eating animals, which is what we talk about often on this show, right? If you are more revolted by the topic of cannibalism, then I might suggest that you have some unconscious or latent speciesist bias, which we all have. Speciesism, of course, is the assumption of human superiority that leads to the exploitation of non-human animals. And human flesh eating is a really common theme in horror, right? Like zombies, of course, even vampires drinking blood is a form of cannibalism. And there's blatant speciesism around this. There's such a taboo and disgust when it's human flesh being eaten, but not animals. You see this really often in horror movies and horror shows, from just blatant flesh eating, like zombie hordes coming after people and just gnawing on legs and brains, right? But we also see it in more subtle scenes, like in the classic campy cult film Rocky Horror Picture Show, I did go to the midnight showings as a teenager of Rocky Horror. I used to dress up like Columbia and act out the scenes with all the audience participation lines. It was so much fun. Do kids do that anymore? Does anyone do that anymore? It was so much fun for freaky kids like me to go to those midnight showings of Rocky Horror. I don't know if people do that anymore. But anyway, so there's this part in Rocky Horror where they're all sitting down to dinner and there's this big slab of meat on each plate, and it's fine and normal, right, when everyone thinks it's animal flesh that they're eating. But Frankenfurter, the main character, gives these subtle hints as to what or who they're eating. And one by one, they kind of start to get it. The characters, the dinner guests, start to kind of get what's going on. And then Frankenfurter gives the big reveal of pulling the tablecloth off the table, and under the glass top table is Eddie, who has been killed by Frankenfurter in an earlier scene, and with hunks like cut out of him. So that's what everyone has been eating. And there's, of course, this, uproar and disgust and horror at the thought of eating Eddie. But when it was a nameless, faceless animal, right, it was no big deal. It was just normal. But this is a common theme in a lot of horror movies, and it's just interesting how when we cross that species barrier, flesh eating goes from a delicious dinner to a horror show, right? Why is it so different? It is our own species, human, so I do get that there is something a little closer to home, that there's certain, there's maybe a certain threat to our own mortality. We feel like it could be us being killed and eaten. But it's so close to animal flesh eating. It's just really interesting that we have normalized this horror of animal flesh eating so that we don't recognize it, the practice, for what it is, for what flesh eating is. We don't recognize it as revolting and sickening and awful until it's human flesh. And not only is it disgusting, but you've taken a sentient animal's life. When it's a human, the act of eating flesh is subversive and sickening and shocking. But when it's animal flesh, only vegans recognize it for what it is. But somehow, as a society, it's been normalized to the point that people don't recognize it in the same way, don't recognize it for what it is, that sickening, shocking practice. But horror movies can really kind of uncover the reality of flesh eating. So the genre of horror and the motif of cannibalism reveals this latent speciesism that everyone has, and they just don't know it. It's fascinating. There's also an interesting species theme in modern vampire movies and shows, and I'm thinking particularly of the Twilight series, where so there's these bad vampires that drink human blood and kill humans, and then there's the good vampires who only drink the blood of non-human animals. There's even a scene where Edward, the main character vampire of the good vampires, he compares his family to vegetarians because they only kill non-human animals. It's so frustrating, again, because we have this species barrier, right? Where the only animal worth protecting is the human animal. If you are killing and drinking the blood of non-human animals, well, then you're just in normal ethical territory. You're no longer a monster. Only monsters kill humans, right? But why? Why is there this vast difference? Is it because humans are conscious? Because humans are sentient? Well, guess what? Non-human animals are conscious and sentient. Is it because humans suffer, we feel pain? Well, animals suffer and feel pain the same as we do. Why? What's the difference? There is a speciesist bias because of the amount of horror we feel in killing and eating humans or drinking their blood versus complete exoneration from killing and eating non-human animals. But I think that all of this, showing this close connection between flesh eating of animals and humans, can also evoke empathy, right? Connecting eating flesh to disgust or it being shocking or repulsive. There's often a meat connection with the location in the horror movies as well. These creepy scenes being in slaughterhouses or meat lockers and meat coolers with the cow, dead cow bodies hanging, right? That's often the location of the killing or where the killer can be found in these movies. So there's this recognition that slaughterhouses are scary places. For who? Right? We're basically subconsciously saying that they are scary places for non-human animals. It's animals that are killed there. So we're admitting that these places evoke fear and dread and are frightening places to be, right? All very interesting. So when we are identifying with the victim in these movies, the fear of having your life threatened and, possibly being tortured or killed in a horrifying way, we're also identifying with the plight of farmed animals. When we empathize with the victim in a horror movie, when we are terrified for what they're going through, we can also empathize with how animals live their short lives every day in fear, with scary people chasing you, torturing you, being electrocuted, cut and killed in gruesome and bloody ways, disemboweled and eaten. I mean, that's a farmed animal's life and death. But people may not realize that that's what they're feeling, or that they're feeling the same thing that animals go through. So I'm here to connect those dots, connect that horror, and point out that what you feel for a victim of a horror movie, that's what you should also feel for farmed animals, because it's the same. They go through the same things. So the horror genre around Halloween really presents us with an opportunity, I think, to talk about speciesism in a unique way that, more so than any other season or holiday. It's a great opportunity to have these philosophical conversations around flesh eating. But ultimately, I do believe that we will, as a society, eventually all see what vegans see and recognize animal flesh eating for the horror show that it is. I long for that day. I hope for that day. And I think we're getting there. Okay, so let's now bring in Marla Rose and lighten things up a bit. She lightens up the airwaves with her positive attitude, quirky, fun outlook. I just loved talking with Marla. I hope you love it too. Here we go. Okay, I am so happy to introduce Marla Rose. Marla is a journalist, columnist, public speaker, recipe developer, author, and event planner. Marla and her husband, John Beske, own Vegan Street Media, which is a full-service marketing, design, and communications company for vegan businesses and nonprofits. Since leaving her job in humane education in 1998, she has dedicated her life to building vegan culture and community. Marla co-founded Chicago VeganMania, which was a fantastic festival that ran for 10 years. For the past several years, she's been writing feature stories for magazines, and she's a contributor to Veg News magazine. She's authored several books, including Fun, Festive, and Fabulous, Vegan Holidays for Everyone, and Humane Halloween, 22 quirky, fun, and bewitching vegan recipes for the spirit of the season. Welcome to the podcast, Marla.
Hey, Hope. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. This is wonderful to do this. We've known each other a long time, been in the vegan community and world together for a long time. I actually came and spoke at Chicago VeganMania back in the day.
I have a terrible memory about just because we had so many events and so many speakers that I was like, I'm pretty sure Hope spoke at one of our events.
Yeah. I came one year. Yes. It was a lot of fun. Such a great event. It was huge. Yeah. I don't remember when it was, 2000 something.
Doesn't even matter anymore.
Right. Well, Marla, we would love to start by getting to know you. And so to me, all vegans are superheroes, and you certainly are a longtime vegan superhero. So all superheroes have origin stories. So we'd love to hear your vegan origin story. Why and when did you go vegan?
I think that to ask why I went vegan, you kind of have to go back to why I became vegetarian. And when I went vegetarian, I didn't know about veganism. It was in the 80s. I was 15, and I went vegetarian because we were in a dissection unit in biology. And I had always had a love and affection for animals. And I also loved my grandmother's brisket and, chicken noodle soup and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was something about that unit that just really made it unavoidable for me to connect the dots. It was just like there was no hiding from the reality of what meat is. And
because you had to dissect a frog, or?
Exactly. Yeah. Because there was this body there. And it wasn't just disgust, it was sadness, but it was also disgust.
Yeah.
But it was a fetal pig, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's what they did back in the day. But it's like I said, it was the 80s, so it was I was lucky enough to have a biology teacher who I was like, I do not want to fail this class, but I also cannot do this anymore. It's
Yeah.
just so disgusting and horrible. And I felt bad because like my unit partner was having to do everything. And anyway, so he was kind of a little ahead of his time, but he said, nobody's ever requested this before, but let's see if we can accommodate that.
Hmm.
And so there were like these computers that were probably like straight out of like the Flintstones. Like, but
Right.
he was, I was able to do comparative work on the computer.
Hmm.
And it was kind of cool because like that kind of set the wheels in motion of like really nakedly seeing what I had been kind of hiding from. Coincidentally, at that same time, I was going on a school trip somewhere, and another weird little coincidence that was, ahead of its time, but like on the paperwork, it said, do you have any dietary preferences or dietary, avoidances or something? This is like 1983. Nobody,
Wow.
everyone hates to say there was no such thing as not eating
Yeah.
what was in front of
Well,
you.
the kids had allergies, like some kind
They
of a
did,
peanut
but
allergy or something. Yeah.
there was still so little consciousness even around that.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I don't know, just on a whim, I wrote vegetarian and the little thing. And I remember at the time I was going, I think I can make it through this whole weekend as a vegetarian. I don't know if I can do it, and like I mentioned, I had quote unquote loved meat before that. I had a wonderful grandmother who I was very connected with emotionally, and giving up some of the things that she cooked it felt like I was kind of losing her in a
Hmm.
way. Anyway, from there, it just that one weekend just lasted forever. And then about 12 years later, so this was in the 1990s. By 1995, I was working at a large animal shelter in Chicago in humane education. And part of what we did back in the olden days was so we had this hotline. People would call and ask questions. Like they might have questions about, like, for example, a lot of times, what's it called when you cut the nails off of a cat permanently?
Decline?
Declawing, sorry. I
Yeah.
couldn't.
Sorry.
They might have questions about that, about whether it was humane or not. Anyway, as part of that job, again, taking me back to the olden days, we had a little library there that had this cabinet with files. And there were, even though this was a dog and cat place, there were articles on the dairy industry and the egg industry and the cruelty of them.
Hmm.
And it was just in case somebody called, because again, the 1990s, pre-Google, I
Right.
don't know, I'm going to call the Anti-Cruelty Society to find out about the chicken industry, but they did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would be copying articles for people as part of my job and
Ah.
mailing them. But as I was copying articles to send to people who were asking questions, I was reading them because I wanted to make sure this was, it seemed valid and legitimate. And as I was reading these articles, I became more and more educated about the dairy industry and the egg industry, because again, we would get calls about them at least a few times a month. So from there, it just kind of snowballed. And a bunch of us who worked at the Anti-Cruelty Society went vegan at the same time, a bunch of us who are friends, and became involved
Wow.
in animal rights activism. And I think we are all vegan still today. But there was, I think, a staff of like 100 people at the shelter, and like 5 of us were vegan, but we were hardcore. And anyway, the point is, it was really kind of this long process and a short process. Like, so once I knew, I couldn't argue with it,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we went vegan on February 1st, 1995. So.
Wow. Well, I can relate. I went vegetarian in the 80s as well. And it was kind of a similar thing where I didn't really have much influence. It just felt right. Like I did
Right,
not want to hurt animals.
right.
And you started making that connection between animals and meat. And I also had a similar thing with my grandmother because I adored my grandmama Opal as well. And she would make spaghetti and meatballs,
Yeah,
and it was my favorite dish, right? And when I was, kind of flirting with vegetarianism, I wanted to tell her not to make the meatballs,
right.
but I felt so ungrateful, and like I didn't want to burden her, with it. And yeah, so I, I had a similar thing with my grandmama. And then also similarly, that when I went vegan in 1990, it was because of reading about it. We didn't have the
Right,
internet, we didn't have
exactly.
videos, we didn't have anything like that. It was about books and
Yes,
articles.
yes. It's true.
um, yeah.
It's true. I mean, a lot of people went vegetarian or went vegan, I should say, really from like Diet for a New America and books like
Yes.
that at the beginning,
Yeah.
And sometimes there would be like some janky video that was like, totally cutting edge for the time.
Yeah.
That we did now and
Right.
laugh. But yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean the connection between the foods we eat and memory and emotions are can be very deep,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so if you get to the undergirding of that and you say, what connects me to my grandmother is not her brisket or her meatballs, it's this love that we share and this emotional connection that we have. Yeah, I totally understand and relate to that very much.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, grandmother
Well,
a
we
good grandmother is very special.
Yes. Well, we are certainly in that first wave of
Yeah.
vegans that kind of paved the way for what's happening now. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I don't feel like, as someone who's vegan in the 90s, that things were, that we had a lot fewer choices, that things were a lot less widespread. But it never felt at all like a burden. It never felt like a hardship. Even, traveling or whatever, it always felt like I am so grateful that I can make this decision. And
Hmm.
now I feel like a kid in a candy store, quite
Right.
literally. But yeah, I mean, I think it is important for people to not think that this was created out of thin air. People have been creating demand for it and building a case for it for years and years and years.
That's
And
right.
it's now kind of coming together.
Well, so I know that you love Halloween, and
Yes.
Halloween, yay, is coming up. And you host the Humane Halloween Facebook group
Yes.
on Facebook, which is a lot of fun. Everybody should join. And you've written a vegan cookbook around Halloween recipes, which is awesome. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can check that out. But the holidays, it can sometimes be a hard time for vegans in kind of a unfriendly, non-vegan holiday time. These months coming up can
The Burr
sometimes
months.
be
The Burr months.
the
BER.
Burr months. That's right. September and October. Yes, absolutely. They can sometimes, be challenging for
Yeah.
vegans. And, but as vegans, we want to celebrate too, as we should. So what are your tips for creating vegan centered holidays?
Oh, I love that question. That's so awesome. Well, first of all, I think that some of this harkens back to what we were talking about with our grandmothers and connections to certain traditions and people. And for me, from the inception, from when John and I started Vegan Street and as vegans in 95, we consciously always were about abundance and creating the world we wanted to see rather than, oh, I can't have that, oh, that's not something, like we never wanted to frame it as a lack. I think that sometimes when you present veganism to people, a lot of times their first thoughts start going to, well, what am I going to do for my birthday? What am I going to do for Thanksgiving? What am I going to do when my aunt comes to town and she wants to go to a steakhouse. You start thinking about like special events.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird. Like, rather than like the day-to-day stuff that is probably more of a challenge, you start thinking about these like special occasions that are just rare. But for me, the whole reason for the season with Halloween is like, so I've always loved Halloween. I love the spookiness. I like the cool nights and warm days. I like pumpkins. I like witches. I like horror to a degree.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to ever give up Halloween. And the fact is that you don't have to, and I wanted my son, who's now 20, but when he was a child, I wanted him to be able to experience trick-or-treating and Halloween. And I did not like want to raise a child who resented the fact that he was vegan because he
Yeah.
didn't get to participate in things. And I
Right.
want to participate in them. So
Right.
so
Yeah.
one of the early sort of influences, I think, on Humane Halloween was there used to be, I think it was called reverse trick-or-treating through Equal Exchange or some other chocolate company that works on slavery-free chocolate issues. That's a whole separate topic that I'm sure we'll talk about at some other time. But
Yeah.
so what they would do for Halloween is you would send them, say $20, and they would send you a bunch of cards with little chocolates that you sticky glue or sticky tape onto the cards, and the cards kind of describe the importance of slavery-free chocolates. And they were vegan chocolates, they were dairy-free. And so the idea of reverse trick-or-treating is that you go door to door and as the trick-or-treater, you give this gift of, yeah,
Ah,
it's a really cool idea.
that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we actually did that a few times in the inception of Humane Halloween. It was all about like that, going door to door, giving out, vegan candies. But then we were like, why don't we just do that from our house? And like, like we don't
Yeah.
have to. So we were doing that at our house, and then we were kind of developing little. My husband's a graphic designer, so like posters people can print out that describe Humane Halloween for doors of, windows or whatever, people who are participating. But so like, I don't remember your original question, but my my point is that Halloween was always really special to me, and I wanted my son to have it be special as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that a lot of vegans love Halloween for some reason. We really love Halloween. And I've always wondered what's up with that. But I've thought about it and I think that maybe unlike other holidays that are coming
Mhm.
up, it doesn't have so much to do with food or
Yeah,
like a big meat-filled meal,
right.
that so many of the others do, right? It's just kind of about candy and that's more peripheral,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Unlike the meat fest that is
Right.
Thanksgiving and
Oh,
Christmas.
yeah. That's true. And
So,
I think there's also a spirit of DIY with Halloween that a lot of people really love, that
mm,
it's not
yeah.
so corporate that, obviously you can buy decorations and we do, but there's this sort of genuine creative expression around Halloween that I think, as vegans, we're used to sort of carving things out ourselves, sometimes. And
Yeah.
so I think that is appealing. But I think it's just the unbridled, childlike experience of something. Again, like I think a lot of times veganism, because we know what we know, because we are immersed in what we're immersed, because we can't turn off what's been turned on, it can feel very heavy sometimes,
Yeah.
and there's something about Halloween, like from your earliest recollections, that's so unbridled and
Mm.
joyous, and I think sometimes with vegans, it's just like that we can just enjoy something, that it doesn't have to be this big educational outreach, like how we started out with Humane Halloween. That it
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
just be about participating in the way that makes sense for us. And, today, Humane Halloween is really just a celebration of autumn and Halloween, fall. And Halloween, some people there are really into horror. Some people love fall but can't stand horror.
Right.
It's just like it's really kind of equal opportunity, and it's remarkable for our Facebook group how much people respect and get along. I don't know that I think that there's something to this idea of just sort of letting your guard down a little and
Mm.
enjoying things for the sake of enjoying them. And that is so
Mm.
easy to celebrate Halloween as a vegan,
Yeah.
Of course, there's lots of non-vegan candies and, just like junky stuff that you don't want to
But
put
there
together.
are a lot of candies that are kind of accidentally vegan,
Right.
like Smarties
Yeah.
and
Dum Dums.
Dum
Right.
Dums. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of them that are just so chemically,
Ubiquitous, right? Yeah.
they're so artificial that there's no actual.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I think
and there's a lot of new vegan candies now. I mean, a ton of them. And you go to
there.
the natural food store and you can find a
Oh my
huge
gosh.
variety of fun, candies that are
Oh
vegan.
my
So
gosh.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I do think that there is something maybe to what you were saying too about like there are these heavy, heavy months coming up, thinking about cruelty to animals, of knowing what the turkeys and the other animals needlessly go through, of
Yeah.
dealing with family crap, of dealing with people like thinking that you're judging them just for existing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
maybe it's kind of like, let's enjoy ourselves now because we've got some ugly stuff coming up.
Right. And interestingly, that might be another reason why we like Halloween is it's not necessarily the get together with other family. It's more
Yeah.
your own family.
Oh God,
So
yes. That's so
yeah.
true. That's
But
so
at the same time though, I do want to say that I love actually Thanksgiving and Christmas
yeah,
food.
yeah. I do
I
too.
I
Yeah,
love the veganized versions of Thanksgiving and Christmas food. I think I would say it's my favorite genre of food,
yeah.
actually.
I love that.
Uh, so it's always fun every year
Mhm.
to, veganize. I mean, Kojin and I will do through November, almost every weekend we'll do another kind of fun, we'll do, oh, let's do stuffing this weekend and let's do
Yes,
the gravy and potatoes this weekend, all of that. So yeah, I love the
absolutely.
food.
I totally agree with you. And I know a lot of people have still a lot of sadness around it, but like I did for so long. And then I think when I'd been vegan for about 4 or 5 years, we started going to a friend of ours would have these wonderful vegan potlucks, in her home for Thanksgiving. And it completely transformed how I feel about the holiday. And
Yeah.
that like now our friend has moved to Florida, but we host it and it's a joyous celebration, and it's not like we are forgetting the animals or pretending that the barbarism doesn't exist. But I think a lot of what I try to do in my life and sort of the work I do is trying to own things for ourselves. And so we own it for ourselves. If you don't like the term Thanksgiving, which I understand, and you want to say Friendsgiving instead, fine. If you hate the holiday and you want to go see a movie instead, fine.
Yeah, and and that's absolutely right. Finding your thing, finding your flow, finding your tribe or your community
Right.
can really be helpful. Like you said, having meals together with like-minded people, with other vegans, can be so healing,
Yeah.
for these holidays.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that part of the human condition is this feeling of isolation. So, and I think sometimes we lose vegans when we feel like when people tell you that they're having a hard time as a vegan because they can no longer go out with their friends in the same way they used to, or they're afraid of upsetting their parents or whatever, is like we need to be able to listen to that even if it was easy for us. Like I do really believe from all of my conversations with people that for some people it's easier than for others, and not for reasons like cravings, although that can be a thing, but more stepping outside of the comfort zone of maybe perhaps upsetting someone.
Right.
But I
Right.
think when somebody tells you that that's a fear of theirs, we should listen and try to help,
Yeah.
and instead of dismissing it.
Yeah, yeah, and this kind of goes along with the work that you do around creating community with veganism. I know that
Yeah.
this is a big part of what you want to do. around creating connection and community, it's so important that we feel connected and
Absolutely.
not isolated. How do we do that? Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that like a lot of times when people think about community, I don't know about you, Hope, and I know I often give the impression because I love talking one-on-one, but I know I often give the impression of being an extrovert and I'm absolutely not. I'm a true introvert.
Mm.
I think a lot of times people when they hear the word community or whatever, they kind of recoil, because, especially these days when we're not so trusting of one another. But humans are built for community. And community doesn't have to be like these big, loud festivals and things like that. It can be one on one, it could be a small group, it could be a slightly larger group. But we are kind of more pack animals than isolation animals, right? I
Mm.
mean, like, being put out of the pack or out of the tribe or however you want to phrase it was a threat to our survival. So when people respond to feelings of fear around perhaps alienating others by their choice of becoming vegan, I mean, it's a valid, deeply intrinsic to the human experience reaction, I think. So I think, what we need to do is ask people, like, what does community, like, when have you felt in the best possible way that you have a community that supports you? What does that look like? What does it feel like? Feeling is an important part of it. We don't all need to be best friends, and that's true of all communities. We don't all need to know everyone's business, and and it's certainly not in online communities. But I do think that it is part of what makes you feel healthy and whole.
Speaking of building community,
Yeah.
uh, you have this wonderful social media presence with Vegan Street Media. And I would love to ask you about that because your memes are some of my favorite memes. Whenever a Vegan Street Media meme comes up, I'm like, yes, share, love, You do such a great job of bringing in humor also, along with very, hard hitting and interesting and inspiring. And, there's so much, you go in a lot of different directions. But that humor, I love that you can come up with humorous things as well, because that's very hard, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
I make social media posts as well, and coming up with something funny is really tough. Yeah, but you do such a great job of it. I'd love to hear a little about Vegan Street Media.
Yeah, sure. Well, okay, so a couple little things. First is, so Vegan Street is kind of what more people are familiar with, and that's our presence on social media. So veganstreet.com. So it's kind of confusing because we have these two entities.
Okay.
Veganstreet.com, that's what's on Facebook and that's what's creating the memes and stuff like that. Vegan Street Media is our business end of it. So like the Vegan Street Media is our communications company.
Okay, I see. I
Yeah, I
see.
know it's a little confusing. Yeah. And so my background is in writing. My husband's background is in graphic design. So it's like, why not create an ad agency for the animals?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we see the content we create for Vegan Street. And because we're committed to creating, X number of pieces of content each week, whether they're recipes or memes or articles or interviews or whatever it is, that it runs the gamut of educational to humor. But I think that is also part of our game plan of like showing people that vegans are three-dimensional, fully developed humans. We have humor. We have, like nobody wants
Yeah.
to reinforce the stereotypes.
So I know something else I wanted to ask you about. When you organized Chicago VeganMania,
Mhm.
you had a principle of vegan is the default. So vegan is just the default. It's kind of normalizing vegan as the basic or the general or as you're walking around, everything's vegan, right? And this is an interesting, so there's kind of two different approaches here. And we actually see it in restaurants here in the Bay Area, because some have vegan just everywhere. I mean, scrawled,
Right,
on the
right,
menu, and everywhere you see vegan, vegan, vegan.
right.
But then there's others that don't say it at all. And you just kind of have to know, or like be in the know. Like at the Butcher's Son. The Butcher's Son is a very popular sandwich delicatessen in Berkeley. And actually, we were eating there one day, and it was a group of vegans, and we're talking, and we're, vegan, vegan, veganing. And there was a guy eating this, big roast beef sandwich or whatever. And he actually leaned over to us and he said, "What are you eating that's vegan?" Like he didn't get it. He had
Oh,
no idea that it was vegan.
sure.
So really interesting. But I think that was their strategy. They were trying to just get people in to have a roast beef sandwich, and they wouldn't know the difference, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I'm kind of neutral on this. I see the benefits of both sides. I mean, I think we do want to normalize the word vegan too, getting people familiar and seeing the word a lot. But then I see the other side too. So I'm curious. I want to hear about this. Tell me your take on this.
Yeah, for sure. No, first I have to correct something. I might have misspoke or omitted a word or something in our communications, but we had no issues with people using the word vegan at the event. But veganism was the default. So if a company that had a booth there described their stuff as vegan, that was fine. We had no issues with that. We did, when we were organizing, we were sort of putting together our exploratory, committee for VeganMania. We had someone, a couple of people who were pretty high up with different animal rights organizations discouraging us from using the word vegan in the title of the event. And, the reasoning being, this was 2009, which wasn't a million years ago or anything like that. But at the same time, it was still pretty, wasn't as advanced as it is now. But they thought it would discourage people from coming. I don't know if this is true or not, but one of the things that we kind of prided ourselves on, and that other speakers told us, was that we were the first large vegan fest that used the word vegan in the title.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but the point is that while we didn't shy away from the word vegan at all, we were also not trying to overcompensate for anything. We weren't trying to be bashing it in your head. So it's kind of a tightrope a little bit, because really what we were trying to get across is, and I think we successfully did this is a default vegan space for the day. So we have friends who called it vegan Christmas.
Yeah.
You can just wander from point A to point B to point Z to point X, and everything in the room is vegan, and all the speakers are promoting veganism. The idea was, in Chicago at the time and today, there are bacon festivals. There are, probably wings festivals.
Yeah.
And
Here in the Petaluma, in the Bay Area, north of San Francisco, Petaluma has the Butter and Eggs Day.
Yeah, exactly. So we are would the bacon festival call themselves the salted smoked meat I don't know. What? So they have no compunction about using the term. So we're being vegan is awesome, and we're gonna just put the word out there and see how people receive it. And so some of the people who kind of tried to discourage us from using the term, are people I respect very much. And I definitely put thought into their concerns. And that, I think, is part of the name of it, Chicago VeganMania. The word mania, I think, just adds a humor to it,
and a fun factor.
Yeah, that I think, as much as the word vegan can be intimidating or off-putting for some people, the word vegan mania kind of offsets that a little bit. We just really infused it with the spirit of optimism, and that we're here, we're queer, get used to it kind of thing. We've got nothing to hide. But I do understand that our situation is different from a company, you know, who is trying to get people who are famously, you know, human beings are famously squeamish about trying new things, bizarrely more worried about trying something that's vegan than eating a corpse, which is bizarre.
Yeah, right.
But we just wanted to put it all out there in a very transparent way. And I think, you know, it's like every year we grew, every year there was like tons of optimism and excitement about it. I'm kind of neutral in that, like, I do tend to name everything vegan with the word vegan in the title. I just like the word. I love owning it. But I can understand also like a squeamishness with a company naming it. You know what I mean? But also there's people like Miyoko who embrace it full-throatedly, you know?
Right.
So, and she's
Exactly.
had tremendous success. So I don't
Yeah.
think there's a hard and fast rule to it. I think there's a lot of people who are telling us that there is, and I don't think there is.
Yeah,
You know what I
no,
mean?
that's absolutely right. Yeah, I think it's subjective. And I think it's also really important to have both tracks happening or both
Yeah,
tactics
you're so
going
right.
on so we can analyze and see what might work best. But you know, ultimately, of course, we want to get rid of the word. I mean, I think ultimately what we
Yes,
want
yeah,
is to not have to use the word. We
right,
want the word to go away
right.
because we want everything to
To be the
just
norm. Yeah,
normally and naturally be vegan.
right. It's like the
Yeah.
word, we don't want to have to be feminists. You
Yeah.
know,
Right. Right.
it implies that
That there's a problem.
inequality, and there is inequality. We want to get to the point where there's not, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
yeah.
right.
So I totally am 100% with you. I have no issues with anyone choosing the track that they choose, but I will say that, like, as a consumer, you know, if something is labeled plant-based, you know, it gives me pause just because I do see now that there are a lot of products that are not vegan that are labeled plant-based. And that's
Yeah.
understandable. It's kind of baked into the word. You know, the word is meant to sort of, I think, be more inclusive and be less jarring or exclusionary than the word vegan, but it's not an actual term. You know what I mean? It's not something where, like, vegan, you know what that means.
Right.
Plant-based.
That's absolutely right. There is an actual definition of vegan. There's actually a line in the sand that is understood of what is and isn't vegan. But you're right,
Yeah.
with plant-based, it's much more kind of loose.
Yes.
It
Yes.
doesn't necessarily mean vegan.
Right.
So yeah, no, it's
Yeah. So
watered. It's really watered down, I think.
right. Be aware of that as a consumer and a shopper, you know, that it doesn't imply vegan anymore,
Right.
like if it ever did. But I will say that I think it was Merriam-Webster just added some new words to their dictionary, and plant-based, I believe, was one of them.
Oh, really?
And it does not mean vegan, according to them. It can mean entirely or mainly comprised of plants or non-animal foods. So, you know, there are people who go overnight vegan. There are people who have a long, slow thing. My thing is, like, I want to support everyone who's making a genuine effort
Yeah.
to eventually go vegan, but I'm
Sure.
not going to dumb down the reality of animal agribusiness, you know,
That's right.
to
That's
make
right.
someone
Yeah, I
feel
feel like as long as people are moving in that direction and
right,
their heart is their heart is vegan and they want to
right.
go there. But I just don't want them to stop at the 80% plant-based and feel like, oh, I'm good, you know.
Yeah.
Uh
Right. Yeah. No, I've known a lot of people in my life who have called themselves 90%, 95% vegan or whatever. It's like, I don't think so. Are you eating like a tablespoon of butter a day or something?
yeah. Right,
Um,
right.
yeah. So, and I think if people get honest about it, I do think that a lot of it really is like, there are people who like to feel like they have at least a toe or two out of the door for whatever reason,
Right.
you
You're right.
know? Yeah.
That I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's that they don't want to feel 100% cut off
Yeah.
from, mainstream or
You
their
know, and
family or whatever.
yes. And
Yeah.
I think so much of it stems to this idea of, if they quote unquote make a mistake, whether it's a genuine mistake or they lapse and eat animals or whatever, animal products, that they have failed, and that we are such a black and white, all or nothing kind of species,
Right.
um, and so afraid of judgment, including internal judgment, that I think just that alone is enough to make people apprehensive about labeling themselves vegan. So one of the things I tell people to try to offset that a bit is just really honestly, like, I mean, that first year I was vegan, I was really figuring it out. Like it was, I probably not technically vegan the first year because I would like occasionally get a muffin or something at
Yeah.
at a bakery and be like, well, I don't know that it wasn't made with eggs. I shouldn't even laugh about it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you
No,
can't.
I was the same way. The whole first year, was addicted to ice cream,
Yeah,
and
there were no reasonable
there was
vegan.
no vegan ice cream back in the 80s and 90s, everybody.
No.
Yeah. And
No, you
what there was icy and yucky, and
oh, bad stuff.
yeah, no, we're so lucky now.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I would go and sneak ice cream my whole
Yeah,
first year,
yeah, no,
you know.
I get it, and it's like
Yeah.
almost like you have a little bit of a window then if you just
Yeah.
call yourself 95% or you're dishonest to yourself about this or that. And ultimately what happened with me toward the end of that first year is I saw a movie about what is done to the animals and the dairy industry and the egg industry. And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
done fooling myself. I'm done giving myself this little escape hatch. And and then it was totally easy. But the tormented year was when I just kept like playing games with myself and my
Mm,
ethics.
yeah.
And so once I kind of closed that door, then it was easy breezy. And now I know, and dairy and eggs are not food to me, or they shouldn't be to anyone, but they're not
That's
food to me.
right. Yeah,
So
that's right. It's a
yeah,
great way to look at it. It's not food.
it's not food.
Yeah.
And that's really, so interesting because when I raised my son, I was really cautious about like, I don't want to demonize things because I don't want to freak him out. He's already naturally sensitive. When we would go through like a grocery store and there were, samples out and there was something that was not vegan that looked like, I don't know, like maybe crackers that were cheesy or something like that. I would just say, I'm sorry, it's not vegan. And he would totally understand because he just doesn't conceptualize non-vegan food as food. It's just not food.
Yeah. Yeah.
While it's not a big deal to him to be vegan, it's just that that's the state we're trying to get to, Hope, is where it's just a normal, natural. Yeah, it's not a struggle. He holds it dear to his heart. It's a big part of his own values that he has adopted for himself, but it's also natural and normal.
So we often talk about the humane hoax on this podcast. Of course, the new labeling that we're seeing with free range and cage free and all of that. I wondered what your feelings are on this issue, on the issue of the humane hoax. And I know that you do a lot of memes
Yeah,
around the humane
yeah,
hoax.
yeah,
Vegan Street, you create memes that
yeah,
are certainly exposing the humane hoax.
yeah. Well, I feel like the humane hoax is sort of baked into the industry understanding that people don't want to they want to believe good things about what they're eating, or at least they don't want to believe bad things about what they're
Right. Yeah.
eating. And so the more things can be opaque, the more things can be euphemistic rather than literal. Like just the idea like of quote unquote free range, when you tell someone that can mean one open door in this giant egg factory where very few leave, or get access to the outdoor. It's just when you educate people about what the reality is, it is challenging because again, people want to not believe bad things about what they're eating because they don't want to believe bad things about themselves. They don't want to believe, well, I was this terrible violence promoting person, for all of these years. So what kind of person am I? So you're kind of like the bearer of bad news and the the bummer, and it's unfortunate, but like we're the people who are exposing the humane hoax, like you, like your organization, like the people who are just insistent on using facts and non-euphemistic language. Unfortunately, you kind of get cast, I think, as buzzkills, because again, it's something people want to believe. Like everyone knows someone they grew up with who had a dairy farm or had dairy cows, I should say. They're dancing off to the sunset to a happy little death.
Yeah, right.
So you're sort of having to counter these myths that people want to believe. And I think what it's telling us is that we're not okay with suffering and cruelty and violence. And so these things are in place to try to misguide us and try to deflect us from that, try to obfuscate that. So I think the best we can do is not reinforce them however we can. Like we're, as vegans, we're never going to say, get this other kind of dairy milk instead. We're never going to do that because we know that it is still exploitation. It is still forced impregnations. It is still babies being taken from their mothers. Same thing with the egg industry. Like there's just different degrees of horror, and I just want my horror in fiction form, not involving animals and on screen. So, industries that, or a lot of ways that the industries are trying to extract money from people by believing the best things about themselves, that I support this industry, that makes me this kind of person. I buy only these kind of eggs. I buy only this kind of meat. And so our job meaning is like the larger group of us who are trying to educate about it and trying to remove the obfuscations, is to do that in as many, like unfortunately, it is part of the whole industrial complex in our brains of disengaging and not seeing the animal in the food that we're eating. So you kind of have all of that tied up together in this big knot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things that people hide behind with these labels, even like in the quote unquote Humane Slaughter Act doesn't apply to the vast, vast, vast majority of animals. And when it does, it's certainly not humane. You know what I mean? So like, these are all in place to make people feel better about violent choices, about a violent industry that they're supporting.
Well, Marla, it has been really a delight to talk to you. You're so bubbly and joyful. I I love it.
Well, I just
And
love talking to people like you. So
yay. Well, I've enjoyed it so much. But we do need to wrap up. I feel like we could just talk all
Oh,
day.
absolutely.
uh, I like to wrap up with this question. What gives you hope for the future?
Oh my God. So much. I'm getting like, unexpectedly teary thinking about it.
Oh,
It's like, I don't know if, it's hormones or what, but not hormones from dairy or meat.
right. That's right.
There's so much that gives me hope, that it's almost hard to narrow it down.
Wow, that's
So
great.
this is what I would say is, the people who are vegan, who have been vegan from the earliest days of it to now, we are creators, we are resourceful, we are passionate, we are brilliant. We are bringing so much to the table in terms of creativity, in terms of activism. Younger generations like my son are just growing up without the notion that these things are food, which is phenomenal. Like raising my son among other vegan kids was a great joy and privilege of my life. There's so much that gives me hope. And I think just the fact that there are so many brilliant, deeply committed, compassionate people who are giving it their all to change the world for the better. I mean, how can you not feel hope about that? And I've felt like that from the beginning, even when there were like 5 of us.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely have my moments and days sometimes, try to keep them to an hour at most of despair. But there's so many people coming at it from so many different directions, whether it's podcasts like yours, whether they're writers, whether they're graphic designers, whether they're in the food industry or the restaurant industry, whether they're activists. There's so many different angles, and for people to bring their best and to bring their talents, I'm just overwhelmed with hope sometimes, that there is so much hope to have.
Hmm.
I know it sounds treacly and, goody two shoes, but you caught me at a moment of hope.
I love it. No, I love that so much. It's interesting the wide variety of answers
Yeah.
that I get from this question because, it's a crazy dire world out there and it is hard to be hopeful, but I agree with you. I feel that being in the vegan community, seeing how far we've come with
Yes.
veganism, it is hopeful. It's incredibly hopeful
Yeah.
that we will create the future that we want to see and come through this. Yeah, I
I mean,
love
we're
that.
doing it. We're doing it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not going to be with a finger snap. I'm sorry. I would love
right.
that. We're doing that, and we're building such a beautiful world as it's going on. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
there's plenty to despair about. There's no shortage of that.
yeah,
But there's also so much to have hope about. We're creating so much good,
yeah.
and it's going to change the world, and it's all
Yay.
over the globe.
Yay. Yes, I love it. I love it. I love it. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Marla, for being on, for being you, for being joyful and positive and hopeful. We all need that so much. And I'm just got a big smile on my face after talking to you. So
Likewise, I do too. I love talking to you,
yeah,
and all the people who are bringing their A game.
yeah,
We
that's
all
right.
have our moments where we're not at our best, and that's just part of life. But on the balance, you're bringing so much good into the world, and so many people are, and that you just can't forget that. It's
Yeah,
like you have to be careful about the media that you're consuming, because it's very easy to slide into despair.
that's right. That's
So
right.
gotta be balanced with it.
Yeah, yeah. Good advice. Good advice. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Marla.
Thank you. Hope it was my sincere pleasure, and I can't wait to share, and I can't wait to listen to your archives.
All right, awesome. Happy Halloween.
Thank you. I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Yay. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Hope.
Thank you for listening to the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. So, one last thought about Halloween coming up. I've always thought it would be a great idea to do a vegan themed haunted house. So, you know how people create their haunted houses or get a warehouse or whatever, and you can walk through it and see creepy scenes and get scared by people in costume, right? So, my idea would be that you are a farmed animal, like the person that's walking through is the farmed animal just having been unloaded from a truck. And maybe there's scary people with blood all over them chasing you with electric prods, and then somehow simulating the conveyor belt and the bolt gun and the throat slitting, right? All that happens in the slaughterhouse. I'm not sure how it could be done, but I see like slaughterhouse footage projected all over the walls, that kind of thing. I think that could be really super powerful. I don't know if I don't know if anyone would actually go through the thing, but but I hope someone tries to do that sometime because that I think would be really really powerful. All right. Well, if you loved the show, give us some love with a 5-star rating if you're listening on a listening app. Would love to see some new reviews as well. Scroll down and give us a rating or review. Don't eat all the vegan candy. Save some for the trick-or-treaters. Have a fun, safe, humane Halloween and live vegan.